You don't realize the moment everything changes, because it doesn't happen with noise, it happens in silence. The second you stop chasing, something inside them begins to unravel in ways they can't control or even understand. What felt like power suddenly turns into confusion, then into something much deeper. Because your absence doesn't just create distance, it exposes truths they were never ready to face. And once that door opens, there's no going back. You need to hear this, because most people never recognize it until it's already happening. The moment you stopped chasing, something shifted, and they felt it. But not the way you might assume, not with relief, not with indifference. What hit them was something far more intense, a sharp, unsettling awareness that shakes them at a level they can't fully explain. Because when you stop pursuing, it doesn't just change your world, it quietly starts to destabilize theirs. They begin to feel a strange emptiness, a space where your attention, your energy, your presence used to exist, something they never even realized they depended on. And now that it's gone, that silence feels loud, unfamiliar, uncomfortable. They don't know how to sit with it, so they start reacting without understanding why. Most people miss this completely. Your absence isn't just distance, it becomes a reflection. It forces them to confront things they've been avoiding within themselves. Deep down, they sense that the control they once had over you is no longer there. And when that sense of control disappears, the mind doesn't stay calm. It becomes restless, unsettled, even desperate. Thoughts begin to surface that they would never admit out loud. Truths they push away during the day start creeping in at night. There's a quiet realization forming beneath it all, that maybe they were never attached to you for who you truly are, but for how you made them feel about themselves. And now that you're no longer there to provide that feeling, the illusion starts to break. But they can't fully face it. Not yet. Their mind is caught in conflict between what they want to believe and what they're afraid might be true. That inner tension starts to affect them in ways they can't quite understand. They imagine your life moving forward without them. Every moment where you seem fine, every smile that doesn't include them, it stings in a way they can't explain. And it's not just longing. It's a mix of emotions, frustration, fear, guilt, all tangled together. It can come out in unpredictable ways, even in behavior that feels confusing or extreme. Most people would avoid facing something like this. They distract themselves, deny it, run from it. But your silence didn't allow that. It forced them to sit with what they never prepared to face. Something deeper starts to wake up inside them. A buried voice they've ignored begins to grow louder, telling them they can't afford to lose you. They replay everything, every message, every conversation, every small detail, trying to find where things changed. They analyze both you and themselves, searching for a moment they could have done something differently. And this is where it becomes intense. That urge to act starts building. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes impulsive, sometimes even surprising to them. Because the human mind struggles more with unresolved tension than almost anything else. And what you've created is exactly that, a powerful unresolved space they can't easily escape. From your side, it may look like nothing is happening. Silence can feel calm, even harmless. But in reality, that silence carries weight. Used in the right way, absence becomes incredibly powerful. The moment they realize they can no longer make you chase them is the moment their facade begins to crack. And once that happens, everything they've been hiding from themselves and from you starts to come to the surface. The composed, controlled version of them begins to feel unfamiliar even to themselves. Because the silence you created isn't empty. It acts like a mirror, reflecting everything they've avoided for so long. And that reflection doesn't stay quiet forever. It demands attention. They can't stop thinking about it. Not because they want to, but because the space you left refuses to be ignored. Deep down, there's a truth they don't even say to themselves. Absence is far more unsettling than rejection. Rejection is clear. It has shape. Absence is undefined. It leaves room for imagination, and that's where fear grows. They start noticing everything, every delay, every small shift in your behavior, every moment where they're not included. Even the smallest details begin to feel significant. Their mind replays moments that once meant nothing, searching for patterns, trying to create meaning where there is none, because the mind craves certainty, and when it doesn't have it, it starts inventing answers. That's when doubt creeps in. They begin questioning themselves, whether they misunderstood you, whether they pushed too far, whether they took you for granted. Insecurities they've buried start rising to the surface, shaping their thoughts in ways they can't control. Loss doesn't just sit quietly in the mind, it searches for resolution. And when it can't find one, it creates its own version of reality. Stories, explanations, justifications, all attempts to regain a sense of control. And from the outside, it may seem small at first, but internally it's anything but. It starts quietly. A lingering look, a passing urge to reach out, a subtle curiosity about what you're doing and how you're living without them. At first, it seems harmless, but it doesn't stay that way. Those small thoughts begin to grow, turning into constant mental loops, imagined conversations, and sharp waves of regret that hit harder than they expect. It's the kind of regret that doesn't just hurt, it lingers, almost bitter, like something they can't wash away. Slowly, they begin to feel trapped inside their own mind. Your distance has triggered something deep and instinctive. They're forced to face a truth they can't avoid anymore, that they can no longer pull you back with charm, pressure, or manipulation. That realization alone is enough to shake them, because most people are not equipped to handle the feeling of losing control. Deep down, a fear starts forming, even if they never say it out loud, the fear that you might be gone for good. And this fear doesn't come from logic. It comes from a much deeper place, the part of the mind that reacts before thinking, that pushes, grabs, and demands answers without patience. Here's where it becomes uncomfortable. Their subconscious begins working behind the scenes, almost independently. They start justifying actions to themselves. Maybe they think they should show you they care. Maybe they feel the need to pull you back in. Or in darker moments, they might even feel like making you feel the same loss they're experiencing. When the ego feels threatened, people can bend their own sense of right and wrong more easily than they'd like to admit. All the masks they once wore start to slip. The calm, composed version of themselves fades, replaced by something more raw and unstable. Excuses no longer hold together. The image they tried to maintain begins to crack, and now it's personal. They're dealing with emotions they can't neatly control or explain. Desire, jealousy, guilt, and shame all collide at once, creating an emotional storm that feels overwhelming. They swing back and forth between wanting your attention and being disturbed by how much they want it. One moment they imagine reconnecting, the next they feel uncomfortable with how deeply affected they are. That internal conflict pulls them in opposite directions. And the strange part is, you didn't do anything dramatic. You didn't fight, you didn't argue. You simply stopped chasing. Yet that single shift has stirred something buried deep inside them. Parts of themselves they've avoided for years are now rising to the surface. Thoughts they would never openly admit begin to echo louder. Feelings of not being enough, of needing something they no longer have access to. Most people can't sit with that kind of discomfort. They try to distract themselves, to explain it away, to pretend it's not happening. But this isn't something that can be reasoned with. It's raw, emotional pressure rising from beneath the surface, spilling into their everyday thoughts. And here's where everything intensifies. The longer you remain distant, the stronger their inner tension becomes. They start noticing things they once ignored, how you carry yourself, how you seem at ease, how your life continues without them as if nothing is missing. Every small detail feels heavier than it should. Every realization adds more pressure. They feel stuck, caught between what they want and what they're willing to admit. That tension pushes their imagination into overdrive. They begin picturing different outcomes, ways to regain control, ways to reconnect, even ways to get back at you. Because your absence has made one thing undeniable: you were never theirs to control in the first place. And that truth hits them harder than anything else. Not because it harms you, but because it forces them to confront something they've avoided, their own lack of control. So now they're in a strange state, not fully aware of it, but not completely unaware either. Something inside them has shifted, and it unsettles them. Their own subconscious starts working against them, and they don't yet know where it might lead. At first, it shows up in small ways, a tension they can't explain, a sudden wave of unease, a quiet anxiety that creeps into their thoughts without warning. But it doesn't stay small. It grows, spreading through everything: how they think, how they feel, how they react. Because the truth is, your absence isn't empty. It forces reflection. And what they see in that reflection is difficult to face. They see themselves without the distractions, without the illusions. They see their vulnerability, their dependence, their insecurities, and it unsettles them deeply. For a long time, they hid behind certain beliefs, feeling in control, feeling above it all, convincing themselves they didn't need anyone. But without you there, those beliefs start to fall apart. And what replaces them is something far more honest and far more uncomfortable. Most people believe confrontation requires words or actions, but that's not always true. Sometimes the strongest form of confrontation is silence. Sometimes stepping back says more than anything you could ever explain. And by choosing not to chase, you forced them to face something real. Their subconscious wakes up, bringing everything they've buried to the surface. All the denial, all the pride, all the avoidance. It crashes forward at once, like a storm they can't hold back anymore. They start going through something they don't understand, something intense and unsettling. Their feelings become tangled. Desire mixed with anger, affection laced with fear, longing tied up with guilt. It's confusing even to them. They might find themselves staring at your name on their phone, wanting to reach out, knowing they probably shouldn't, yet feeling pulled to do it anyway. And in that hesitation, something inside them cracks a little more. Because every mind has hidden layers, fears, insecurities, and desires that stay buried until something forces them out. When life moves in a way they can't control, those hidden parts don't stay quiet anymore. They start pushing forward, demanding attention. On the outside, they may still look calm, collected, even in control. But underneath, it's a completely different story. The deeper part of the mind doesn't stay silent. It keeps nudging, pulling, whispering, and your absence is what triggered it. Now they begin to imagine things vividly, scenarios where you're happy without them, moving forward like they were never essential. Each of these thoughts hits their ego hard. Each one reminds them they can't pull you back or influence you the way they once did. And this is where things can turn into obsession, because the mind struggles more with emptiness than it does with pain. When there's a gap with no clear explanation, it tries to fill it. It starts creating stories, reasons, meanings, anything to make sense of what's happening. They replay past moments again and again, analyzing every detail, every word, every look, trying to find answers. But instead of clarity, it only creates more pressure. Every thought turns inward. Every imagined scenario feeds their fear. Beneath it all, something instinctive takes over. The part of the brain that reacts without thinking, that craves and demands without restraint. It doesn't follow logic or rules, it just wants resolution. And now you've become the center of that storm. They may feel an urge to contact you, to test your reaction, to provoke something, anything. Sometimes it's about pulling you back, sometimes it's about easing their own discomfort, and sometimes it comes from frustration they can't control. Because once the subconscious is activated like this, self-restraint becomes much harder. The pressure builds inside them, and they don't know how to release it. Every sign that you're doing fine without them hits like a shock. Every post, every moment of your life continuing without them feels like a reminder they can't ignore. The difficult part is, you don't see any of this. On your side, it's quiet. On theirs, it's chaos. This isn't just emotional, it's psychological. It changes how they think, how they see things, how they interpret everything around them. Their focus narrows, their thoughts become repetitive, and their insecurities feel louder than ever. And the most frustrating part for them is that they don't fully understand why this is happening. Their logical mind tries to stay grounded, tries to make sense of it, but the deeper part of them has already taken control. They become attached to the tension itself, to the uncertainty, to the silence that feels louder than words. And still, nothing visible happens yet. Everything is building internally. They reach a point where it feels like too much, like they're on the edge of breaking. Their emotions become twisted. What they want is mixed with fear. What they feel is clouded by guilt, and their thoughts become harder to manage. It's no longer simple attraction or curiosity. It's something heavier, something more consuming, and this is where things shift completely. The distance you created has slowly undone everything they thought they had control over. The image they had of themselves starts to fall apart. They're no longer looking at the confident version they showed the world. Now they're facing something real, something vulnerable, uncertain, and uncomfortable, and they don't like what they see. The need, the fear of losing you, the dependence they didn't want to admit. It all becomes clear. It's overwhelming, but they can't ignore it anymore, because your absence revealed something that chasing never could. Most people never reach this point. They never have to face themselves this honestly. But now they're stuck in a contradiction. They want you, but at the same time, they're uneasy about how much they want you. They crave the connection, yet feel unsettled by the intensity of their own emotions. Deep inside, a realization starts forming. They can't go back to how things were. They can't approach you the same way anymore. And at the same time, they're forced to confront a deeper truth, that they feel exposed, that they're not as in control as they believed. Their defenses begin to weaken. The ways they used to avoid these feelings stop working. And what comes next is unavoidable. The pressure inside eventually pushes outward. They may reach out to you, directly or indirectly, but it won't come from the same place as before. It won't be the same dynamic, because now they understand something they didn't before. You were never theirs to control or keep. And that realization doesn't hurt you, it changes them. Your silence didn't force them through manipulation. It forced them into awareness. It made them see parts of themselves they've ignored for years. Their insecurities, their patterns, their fears. It's all right in front of them now, and they can't look away. They begin noticing things they once overlooked. Their own behavior, their own mistakes, the moments they dismissed. And the weight of that realization becomes difficult to carry, because at this point it's no longer about you. It's about them facing themselves. That's the real impact of what you did. You didn't argue, you didn't chase, you didn't try to prove anything. You simply stepped back. And in doing so, you created something far more powerful than confrontation. Silence made them reflect. Distance made them aware. Boundaries forced them to face reality. Some people break under that kind of pressure. Some react with anger, some try to regain control, but none of them stay the same. Because once someone sees themselves clearly, even for a moment, it changes them. And that's the strange truth in all of this. You didn't actively do anything, yet everything shifted. Because the moment the chase ends, something deeper begins. It's no longer about pursuit or attention. It becomes about self-awareness, about seeing what was always there but never acknowledged. And now, standing in that silence, they feel something they can't ignore, the presence of someone who refuses to be controlled, who refuses to chase, who chooses their own space over validation. That kind of presence doesn't need words. It doesn't need effort. It speaks on its own. Because in the end, what they're left with is a realization they can't escape. They wanted you, but you were never something they could possess. And in losing that illusion, they finally come face to face with the one person they've been avoiding the entire time, themselves. What's really happening in this situation goes deeper than attraction or simple emotional attachment. When someone is used to being chased, they slowly build a sense of identity around that dynamic. Your attention becomes part of how they measure their worth, even if they never admit it. So when that attention disappears, it doesn't just feel like distance. It feels like something inside them has been taken away. The mind isn't comfortable with uncertainty. It prefers clarity, even if that clarity is painful. But silence gives no answers. It leaves space. And in that space, the imagination becomes active. That's why absence can feel more intense than rejection. Rejection closes a door. Absence leaves it open, and the mind keeps returning to it, trying to understand what changed and why. At a deeper level, this triggers something connected to control. Not always in a manipulative way, but in a psychological sense. People naturally feel safer when they understand their position in someone else's life, when they know they can reach out and get a response, when they feel they can influence how things go. When that predictability disappears, it creates internal instability. The brain interprets it almost like a threat, which is why emotions become stronger and less rational. There's also an element of ego involved. When someone is no longer chasing them, it challenges the image they had of themselves. They start questioning things they never questioned before. Was the connection real, or was it one-sided? Did they misread your feelings? Did they take you for granted? These questions don't come from calm reflection. They come from discomfort, and that discomfort pushes them to search for answers quickly, even if those answers are not accurate. At the same time, your silence creates contrast. Before, your presence may have felt normal to them, something expected. Once it's gone, it becomes noticeable. What was once taken for granted now feels valuable. This isn't always because their feelings suddenly became deeper, but because the absence highlights what was always there but ignored. Another layer to this is emotional dependency, even if it was subtle. When someone becomes used to how you make them feel, validated, important, desired, they begin to associate you with that emotional state. When you step back, they don't just miss you, they miss how they felt around you. That can create confusion because they may think they miss you as a person, when in reality, they are also reacting to the loss of that feeling. Over time, this can either lead to awareness or resistance. Some people start to reflect honestly. They recognize their patterns, their need for control, or the way they handled the connection. Others go in the opposite direction. They avoid that discomfort, distract themselves, or try to regain control in indirect ways. The outcome depends on how willing they are to face themselves. Your role in all of this is simpler than it seems. By stepping back, you removed yourself from a pattern that no longer served you. You stopped feeding a dynamic that relied on imbalance. That action alone creates space, not just for them to reflect, but for you as well. It allows you to see things more clearly without being influenced by constant interaction. There's also a shift in perception. When you stop chasing, you naturally appear more grounded, more self-contained. Not because you're trying to create that image, but because you're no longer reacting in the same way. That change can make people see you differently, sometimes with more respect, sometimes with more curiosity. But that shift is a byproduct, not the main point. The deeper truth is that silence is not about making someone react. It's about returning to your own center. What happens on their side is a consequence, not the goal. If the focus becomes controlling their reaction, then the dynamic hasn't really changed. But if the focus stays on your own clarity and boundaries, then the entire situation transforms in a healthier way. In the end, what feels like power in silence isn't really about influence over someone else. It's about no longer needing to prove your value through pursuit. It's about being comfortable with space, with uncertainty, and with letting things unfold without forcing them. And that's something most people struggle with, which is why it stands out so strongly when someone finally does it. There's another layer most people overlook, and it has to do with how the brain processes emotional patterns over time. When someone gets used to a certain rhythm with you, messages, attention, reactions, it becomes predictable. Predictability creates comfort. But the moment that rhythm breaks, the brain doesn't just notice it, it fixates on it. It starts scanning for meaning, trying to restore what feels like a missing pattern. That's why even small changes in your behavior can feel exaggerated on their side. What makes it more intense is that the brain is wired to prioritize unfinished experiences. Psychologically, incomplete situations stay active longer than resolved ones. So when you step back without a clear explanation or dramatic ending, it leaves the connection open-ended, and an open loop like that keeps pulling attention back in. It's not just emotional, it's cognitive. Their mind keeps circling back because it hasn't found closure. There's also a subtle shift in perceived value. People tend to value what feels scarce. When your attention was constant, it may have blended into the background of their life. But once it becomes limited or disappears, it gains weight. Not because you changed, but because access to you changed. This shift can create a sense of urgency in them, even if they don't fully understand why they feel it. At the same time, stepping back removes emotional feedback. Before, their actions likely had a response, whether positive or negative. That feedback loop gave them a sense of influence. Without it, they're left in uncertainty. They don't know how you feel, what you're thinking, or where they stand. And uncertainty is uncomfortable because it removes their ability to predict outcomes. When people can't predict, they either become more reflective or more reactive. Another important part is identity. People don't just attach to others, they attach to roles. If they were used to being the one pursued, admired, or in control, that role becomes part of how they see themselves. When you stop chasing, you don't just change the interaction, you disrupt that role. And when a role is disrupted, the person has to either adapt or resist. That's why you might see inconsistent behavior from them, because they're trying to reconcile who they thought they were with what they're now experiencing. There's also an emotional contrast effect happening. When someone is always present, their presence feels neutral over time. But when that presence is removed, it creates a sharp contrast between before and after. The brain highlights that difference, making your absence feel more significant than your presence ever did. This is why people sometimes only recognize value after it's gone. It's not that the value wasn't there, it's that it wasn't being contrasted. On a deeper level, your silence forces internal dialogue. Without external interaction to focus on, their attention turns inward. And for many people, that's uncomfortable because it brings up thoughts they usually avoid. Doubts, insecurities, past behaviors, they all become harder to ignore. That's why distraction becomes a common reaction. But if the distraction doesn't fully work, those thoughts keep resurfacing. It's also important to understand that not everyone responds the same way. Some people become introspective and start to grow. They recognize patterns, take responsibility, and change how they approach relationships. Others double down on avoidance. They might try to replace the connection quickly, seek validation elsewhere, or convince themselves it didn't matter. The external behavior might look different, but internally, the same trigger has been activated. From your side, the real shift is psychological independence. When you stop chasing, you're no longer relying on their response to feel settled. That changes how you show up, even if you don't say anything. You become less reactive, more selective, and more aware of your own boundaries. And that naturally alters the dynamic, because the interaction is no longer driven by the same emotional need. There's also a long-term effect. When you break a pattern like this, it doesn't just impact this one situation. It changes how you approach future connections. You become more aware of balance, more sensitive to when effort is one-sided, and more willing to step back when something doesn't feel right. That awareness is what creates real stability, not the reaction you get from someone else. And here's something worth being clear about. This isn't about playing a game or trying to trigger a reaction. If the intention becomes manipulation, the pattern simply repeats in a different form. The real value of stepping back is clarity. It shows you who reaches out without being pulled, who values your presence without being reminded, and who only responds when the dynamic benefits them. Over time, the noise fades. The initial intensity, the overthinking, the emotional spikes, they all settle. What remains is a clearer picture of reality. Either the connection rebuilds on healthier terms, or it fades completely. And both outcomes serve a purpose, because they move you away from uncertainty and towards something more stable. What makes this powerful isn't the silence itself, it's what the silence reveals. About them, about the dynamic, and about you. And once you see those things clearly, it becomes much harder to go